Everything is about the future and about if you don't start the children off now with a...
The auditors found something inside the palace books that nobody was supposed to find. William saw the numbers, and Camilla's access to royal funds was never the same again. The audit that changed everything. The British royal family has survived centuries of war, abdication, scandal, and constitutional crisis. It has buried secrets that would have destroyed lesser institutions. It has managed, suppressed, and reshaped narratives with a precision that most governments can only envy. But there is one thing the monarchy has never been particularly comfortable with: numbers. Cold, documented, traceable numbers that sit inside financial ledgers and refuse to disappear, no matter how many courtiers wish they would. In January of 2026, a forensic audit was quietly commissioned inside Buckingham Palace. Not the kind of routine financial review that gets announced in a press release and summarized in a public annual report. This was something different, something internal, something deliberate, and something that several senior members of the royal household apparently did not know was happening until it was already underway. The individuals who authorized it knew exactly what they were looking for, and what they found exceeded even their most uncomfortable expectations. Now, before we go any further, understand what a forensic audit inside a royal institution actually means. This is not accountants reviewing whether the stationery budget was overspent. A forensic audit is the kind of financial investigation commissioned when someone in authority suspects that money has moved in ways it should not have moved. It is the kind of review you order when patterns have emerged that ordinary accounting cycles failed to catch. It is, in the plainest possible terms, what you do when you believe something is wrong and you need documented proof before you act. Prince William authorized it, and that single fact tells you everything about where the real power inside Buckingham Palace now sits. The findings arrived on William's desk in the third week of January 2026. Sources close to the prince describe his reaction not as shock, because William had been watching the financial architecture of the monarchy with increasing scrutiny for months, but as something closer to cold, focused resolve, the kind of stillness that precedes decisive action. According to one senior palace insider, William read the audit summary twice, asked 3 specific questions, received 3 specific answers, and then made a series of decisions that would permanently alter the financial landscape of the British crown. Here is what made those findings so significant. For years, a specific tier of royal discretionary funding had been operating outside the normal visibility of palace financial oversight. Not illegally, at least not in any way that had yet been formally established, but in a manner that raised serious and documented questions about authorization, beneficiaries, and intent. The money in question was not drawn from the sovereign grant, the publicly funded mechanism that supports the official working expenses of the monarchy. That particular stream of funding is subject to parliamentary scrutiny and public reporting. What the audit identified operated through a different channel entirely. A layer of private royal discretionary funds that exists beneath the surface of official palace accounting and has historically been subject to far less external scrutiny. These funds, valued collectively in the tens of millions of pounds, had been directed across multiple years in ways that the audit described as inconsistent with established royal protocol. Payments had been made, authorizations had been granted, and the names connected to those authorizations were not names that William had sanctioned. Because here's the question that the audit forced onto the table and that nobody inside the palace could answer cleanly. If William did not authorize those fund movements, and the Duchy of Cornwall legal team had not authorized them, and the keeper of the privy purse had not flagged them through normal channels, then who had? And perhaps more importantly, who had benefited? The answer to that question is what transformed a routine internal review into the most consequential financial confrontation the modern monarchy has ever faced. And it is the answer that led directly to William doing something that no heir, no prince, and no future king had ever done to a sitting queen consort before. He shut the door, completely, formally, and without apology. The money trail. Nobody was meant to follow. The palace has a particular talent for making things disappear. Not dramatically, not with confrontation or public announcement, but quietly. A name removed from a financial document here, a payment reclassified under a different budget line there, an authorization buried 3 levels deep inside an administrative structure, so layered and so deliberately opaque that even the people working inside it cannot always trace where a decision began or who ultimately signed off on it. For decades, that opacity has been a feature, not a flaw. It is how the monarchy protects itself. It is how uncomfortable arrangements stay comfortable. And it is precisely why the money trail that the January 2026 audit exposed had survived undetected for as long as it had. Because whoever structured it understood the palace system intimately. They knew which channels attracted scrutiny and which ones did not. They knew how royal discretionary funds were categorized, how authorizations were documented, and crucially, how payments could be routed in ways that looked, on any individual inspection, entirely routine. The problem was that nobody had ever looked at all of them together. Nobody had ever pulled every thread simultaneously and laid the full pattern out on a single table. Until now. What the forensic audit revealed was not one irregular payment. It was not a single misfiled authorization or an isolated clerical anomaly that could be explained away with an administrative apology and a quiet correction. What it revealed was a pattern, consistent, recurring, and deliberate. Over a period stretching back at least 4 years, funds drawn from a private royal discretionary reserve had been directed toward a cluster of recipients and purposes that shared one defining characteristic. They were all connected in one way or another to Queen Camilla's personal and commercial orbit. Now pause here, because this is the part of the story that requires precision. The audit did not conclude, at least not in its initial findings, that Camilla herself had personally authorized every payment or personally directed every transfer. Royal financial structures are rarely that simple or that clean. What it concluded was something arguably more troubling, that a pattern of fund movements had occurred that systematically benefited individuals and projects within Camilla's immediate circle, and that the authorizations underpinning those movements could not be clearly traced to any sanctioned decision-maker within the established royal financial hierarchy. In other words, the money moved. It moved in a direction, and nobody could produce a clean paper trail proving that the right person had told it to move there. The amounts involved were not trivial. Sources familiar with the audit findings have indicated that the total value of the fund movements under review ran into several millions of pounds across the 4-year period. Not the kind of figure that gets lost in a budget the size of the British royal household, but not the kind of figure that screams scandal on its face either, which, as any experienced financial investigator will tell you, is often precisely the point. Funds moved at a scale large enough to matter, but small enough to avoid triggering the automatic review thresholds built into palace accounting systems. That calibration, sources say, was one of the details that struck William's team as most significant. This did not look like carelessness. It looked like knowledge. So, where exactly did the money go? This is the question that palace insiders say William pressed hardest on when he reviewed the findings. And the answers that came back painted a picture that is still reverberating through the corridors of Buckingham Palace today. A portion of the funds had been directed toward what were categorized internally as heritage consultation fees, payments made to external advisors retained to provide counsel on the stewardship and presentation of royal estate properties, on the surface, entirely legitimate. Heritage consultation is a real and necessary function within the royal household. Estates need expert guidance. Properties need management. But when the audit team pulled the contracts behind those consultation fees and examined the individuals retained under them, several names emerged that had no formal relationship with the palace's established contractor vetting process. Names that had, however, a very clear informal relationship with Queen Camilla's personal network. A second stream of payments had been categorized under what the palace accounting system described as cultural legacy development, a budget line that had existed in various forms for years, but had seen a significant and undocumented increase in activity beginning in early 2023. The recipients of those payments included organizations and individuals connected to projects that bore a striking resemblance to the commercial heritage ventures that sources had previously linked to Tom Parker Bowles. Rural culinary programs, agricultural branding initiatives, literary and cultural salon events, each one individually defensible as a legitimate royal cultural investment. Together, when mapped against what the palace already knew about Tom's commercial ambitions, they told a very different story. And then there was the third stream, the one that sources describe as the detail that made even seasoned palace officials go very quiet when they read it. A series of payments had been routed through a discretionary fund historically reserved for the personal household expenses of the sovereign's consort, a fund that, by established convention, is subject to the lightest possible internal scrutiny, precisely because it is considered personal rather than institutional. Those payments, totaling a figure that sources describe only as substantial, had been directed toward external legal and commercial advisory services. Not the kind of legal work associated with official royal duties, the kind associated with property assessment, commercial due diligence, and entity formation. The kind of legal work you commission when you are planning to launch something. Ask yourself this honestly. If you discovered that a fund reserved for the personal household expenses of the Queen Consort had been quietly redirected toward commercial legal advisory services connected to ventures your own son was developing, what conclusion would you draw? Because William drew his, and according to every source close to the situation, he drew it quickly, clearly, and without any apparent desire to be talked out of it. The money trail that nobody was meant to follow had been followed. Every thread had been pulled. Every categorization had been challenged. Every authorization had been traced back to its origin point, or its conspicuous lack of one. And what it left behind, laid out across the pages of a forensic audit report sitting on a prince's desk in the third week of January 2026, was something the palace had not seen in living memory. Documented, specific, and utterly undeniable evidence that the financial boundary between the institution of the monarchy and the personal ambitions of the Queen Consort's family had been crossed, not once, repeatedly, and with what appeared to be considerable sophistication. The question now was not what had happened. The audit had answered that. The question was what William was going to do about it. And those who know him, those who have watched him manage the Duchy of Cornwall with forensic precision, remove Annabel Elliot from the payroll without a single public word, and confront Camilla directly over her loyalty to Sarah Ferguson, those people already knew the answer. William was not going to deliberate. He was not going to convene a family meeting, offer a quiet word over dinner, or give anyone the opportunity to explain themselves before he acted. He was going to move, and he was going to move in a way that left absolutely no room for reversal. Camilla's web. To understand why the audit findings hit with the force that they did, you have to understand what had been building long before the first auditor ever opened a palace ledger. Because the financial pattern that William's team uncovered in January of 2026 did not emerge from nowhere. It did not spontaneously materialize inside the palace accounting system without context, without history, and without the fingerprints of people who had been thinking about money, property, and royal-adjacent opportunity for a very long time. It emerged from something that had been quietly taking shape for years, a web of commercial ambition, personal loyalty, and strategic positioning that stretched from the corridors of Buckingham Palace all the way into the boardrooms of luxury hospitality investors and the offices of heritage law specialists. And at the center of that web sat two figures whose relationship to the British crown was, in the most generous interpretation, complicated. Queen Camilla and her son, Tom Parker Bowles. Let us start with Tom. Because to understand Camilla's role in what the audit uncovered, you first need to understand what her son had been building and how deeply she was invested in seeing him succeed. Tom Parker Bowles is by public reputation a food writer, a restaurant critic, and a man of considerable cultural charm. He has written books celebrating British culinary heritage. He has appeared on television programs discussing food with the kind of relaxed authority that comes from a lifetime of excellent meals in excellent company. He is witty, he is socially connected, and he moves through the upper tiers of British society with the ease of someone who has never had reason to doubt his own welcome. But beneath that affable public surface, sources close to the royal family have, for several years, described a very different set of ambitions. Ambitions that were considerably larger, considerably more commercial, and considerably more dependent on royal proximity than Tom's public profile would ever suggest. Beginning in earnest around 2023, Tom had been developing what sources describe as an expansive commercial vision built almost entirely on the foundation of royal heritage. The concept, discussed in private meetings with investors, heritage consultants, and legal advisors, centered on transforming royal-adjacent properties and the cultural cachet of the crown into premium commercial enterprises. Luxury dining experiences set against the backdrop of historic royal estates, artisanal food brands carrying the implicit endorsement of centuries of royal tradition, elite membership clubs offering wealthy international clientele, what one leaked planning document described as curated proximity to authentic British royal heritage. On paper, each individual component of this vision could be presented as a legitimate celebration of British culture. Pulled together and viewed as a single commercial strategy, it looked like something else entirely. It looked like a plan to monetize the monarchy from the inside. And here's the detail that made palace insiders deeply uncomfortable when it began to surface through the audit investigation. Tom was not developing this vision in isolation. He was not operating as an independent entrepreneur who happened to have a famous stepfather and a mother who sat beside the king on the throne of England. He was operating according to sources with direct knowledge of the discussions, with Camilla's active awareness, her quiet encouragement, and in certain critical instances, her direct involvement in opening doors that would otherwise have remained firmly closed to a food writer with grand ideas and investor decks full of aspirational renderings. Camilla's role in this network was not that of a passive bystander watching her son pursue his ambitions from a respectable distance. Sources describe her as a strategic enabler, someone who understood precisely which levers of royal influence could be applied and where, who leveraged her position as queen consort, not through crude or obvious interference, but through the far more sophisticated tools available to someone living at the very heart of the institution. Private introductions at royal-adjacent social events, gentle advocacy and conversations with courtiers who controlled access to estate properties, the kind of soft but unmistakable signaling that communicates, without ever saying it directly, that a particular project or a particular person has the support of someone whose support matters enormously inside the palace walls. Now, layer that understanding over what the audit found. Heritage consultation fees paid to individuals within Camilla's personal network. Cultural legacy development funds directed toward projects bearing an unmistakable resemblance to Tom's commercial ventures. Legal and commercial advisory payments routed through a fund reserved for the Queen Consort's personal household expenses. When you know what Tom had been building, and you know the role Camilla had been playing in building it, those audit findings stop looking like administrative anomalies. They start looking like infrastructure, the financial architecture of an ambition that had been under construction for years, quietly, carefully, and with a sophistication that suggested both intimate knowledge of how palace funds operated and a firm belief that nobody was ever going to look closely enough to notice. But there is another dimension to this story that goes beyond Tom and his commercial schemes. Because Camilla's web extended further than her son's investment decks and luxury hospitality proposals. For years, she had been cultivating a parallel network of heritage donors, cultural philanthropists, and high society figures whose connection to the palace was maintained and managed through her personal office. Events held under the banner of cultural stewardship. Receptions celebrating British artistic and culinary heritage. Gatherings that on the surface celebrated the nation's creative legacy, but which, according to multiple sources, also served a secondary purpose. Keeping warm a network of wealthy, influential individuals who were being positioned as future partners in the commercial ventures that Tom was developing. One senior courtier, speaking under strict conditions of anonymity, described attending one such event in the autumn of 2025 and being struck by the composition of the guest list. There were genuine heritage supporters present, people with a sincere interest in British cultural preservation. But there were also individuals whose presence made no obvious sense in that context. Luxury property developers, international hospitality investors, representatives of high-end brand licensing agencies, people whose interest in royal heritage was, the courtier noted, considerably more transactional than sentimental. What connected them all was a single thread. Every one of them had been personally introduced to Tom Parker Bowles within the previous 18 months, and every one of them had subsequently been in contact with the legal and commercial advisory services that the audit would later flag as recipients of improperly authorized palace funds. Think about what that means. The events that Camilla was hosting under the banner of cultural patronage were, if these sources are accurate, simultaneously functioning as networking infrastructure for her son's commercial empire. The palace's name, the palace's prestige, and potentially the palace's funds were being used to build a business that had no formal relationship with the crown and no authorization from the people who actually controlled its resources. That is the allegation that the audit placed on William's desk. And that is what transformed this from a story about financial irregularities into something far more personal, far more institutional, and far more difficult to quietly absorb and move past. Because here's what William understood the moment he finished reading those findings. This was not a mistake. Mistakes are isolated. Mistakes are traceable to a single decision made in a moment of poor judgment. What the audit described was systematic. It had structure. It had consistency. It had the unmistakable quality of something that had been designed. And if it had been designed, then someone had made a choice. A deliberate, sustained, and knowing choice to use the financial architecture of the British monarchy as a vehicle for personal and commercial gain. For a man who has spent years building a vision of the monarchy as a modern, accountable, merit-based institution where access to power and resources is earned, rather than inherited through marriage or blood, that realization was not just troubling. It was a declaration of war. And William, as those who know him will tell you, does not respond to declarations of war with diplomacy. He responds with action, precise, documented, and final. What he did next happened within 72 hours of receiving the audit report. And when you hear the details of how swiftly and completely he moved, you will understand why sources inside the palace described the atmosphere in those days as unlike anything they had witnessed in a generation. William moves and he moves. Fast as 72 hours, that is all it took. From the moment William finished reading the audit findings to the moment the first formal restriction was placed on Camilla's access to the discretionary funds in question, 72 hours passed. No family dinner where concerns were gently raised over carefully chosen words. No private meeting where explanations were invited and diplomatic distance was maintained. No quiet conversation brokered by a senior courtier designed to give everyone involved the opportunity to save face before anything irreversible happened. William had read the findings. William had asked his questions. And William had decided. His first call was to the keeper of the privy purse, the senior official responsible for managing the financial affairs of the royal household. The conversation, according to sources with direct knowledge of it, was brief and unambiguous. William had identified specific discretionary fund channels that required immediate restriction pending a full review of their authorization history. He wanted those restrictions in place before the end of the day. They were. His second move was to the Duchy of Cornwall legal team, the same team that had denied Tom Parker Bowles' lease inquiry on the Northacre Southern Orchard Tract without hesitation. The same team that William had spent years building into one of the most legally precise operations within the entire royal household. He instructed them to place a formal hold on any pending payments connected to the flagged authorization chains identified in the audit. Every payment, every recipient, every pending transfer, frozen, documented, and placed under formal legal review with immediate effect. What makes William's response so remarkable is not just its speed, it is its silence. There was no press release. There was no briefing to royal correspondents. There was no carefully worded statement acknowledging that a review had taken place while reassuring the public that everything was under control. William moved through the palace's internal financial and legal architecture with the quiet precision of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment, executing each step cleanly, leaving no procedural gap through which a challenge could be mounted or a reversal could be argued. By the time anyone outside his immediate circle of advisors understood the full scope of what had happened, it was already done. Camilla was not informed in advance. She was not consulted. She was not offered the opportunity to provide context or explanation before the restrictions were applied. She discovered what had happened the same way powerful people always discover they have lost something they believed was untouchable, through an absence, a payment that did not arrive, an authorization that came back flagged, A door that had always been open that was suddenly, irrevocably closed. And in that silence, in that clean and devastating absence of warning or ceremony, William delivered the clearest possible message about who the monarchy now belonged to. Camilla's response. When Camilla understood the full scope of what William had done, the reaction inside the palace was not the measured, dignified response of a queen consort who had been through worse and survived it. It was, according to sources who were present in the days that followed, something rawer than that. Something that stripped away the carefully constructed public composure that Camilla has spent 2 decades perfecting and revealed the person underneath. A woman who had clawed her way from the most reviled figure in British public life to the throne of England, and who now found herself being systematically dismantled by the one person in the entire institution she could not outmaneuver, outrank, or outlast. She demanded a meeting with Charles immediately, not through the usual channels of palace protocol, not via the careful choreography of scheduled audiences and senior courtier intermediaries. She went directly to him. And what happened in that room, according to a source with knowledge of the exchange, was one of the most painful conversations the king has had since ascending the throne. Camilla laid out her position with force. William had acted unilaterally. William had bypassed the king. William had treated a sitting queen consort as though she were a junior household employee, whose access to resources could be revoked without consultation, without warning, and without the basic courtesy of an explanation. Charles listened, and then he did something that Camilla had not prepared herself for. He told her that William had his full support. Let that land for a moment. The reigning King of England, the man who fought 30 years of scandal, public humiliation, and institutional resistance to place Camilla beside him on the throne, looked at his wife in one of the most vulnerable moments of her royal life and chose his son. Not because he did not love her. Sources are careful to make that distinction. But because Charles, ill, exhausted, and clear-eyed about what the audit findings meant for the institution he had waited a lifetime to lead, understood something that Camilla in her fury could not yet see. William was not attacking her. William was protecting the crown. And the crown, in the end, was the one thing that Charles had always placed above everything else. Even her. The silence that followed that conversation echoed through the palace for days. Camilla withdrew. Public engagements were quietly rescheduled. Her personal office went dark in ways that senior courtiers immediately noticed and carefully said nothing about. Tom Parker Bowles canceled 3 public appearances, citing fatigue. And inside the palace, among the staff, the courtiers, the aides, and the advisors who read institutional weather better than any royal correspondent ever could, there was a collective and unspoken recognition that something permanent had shifted. The era of Camilla's quiet influence over the monarchy's financial architecture was over. William had ended it in 72 hours, and Charles had led him. What this means for the monarchy's future. Pull back from the immediate drama of blocked funds, frozen authorizations, and a queen consort retreating behind closed palace doors, and what you see is something far larger than a family dispute over money. What you see is the British monarchy in the middle of its most consequential internal transformation since the abdication crisis of 1936. And unlike that crisis which announced itself to the world, with screaming headlines and constitutional emergency, this one is happening quietly, methodically, and with a precision that suggests the man engineering it has been planning every move for a very long time. William has now demonstrated something that no future king in modern royal history has demonstrated while his father still sits on the throne, that his authority is real, immediate, and non-negotiable. Not symbolic, not ceremonial, not the polite, deferential influence of an heir being carefully managed toward a distant succession. Real authority, exercised through real financial and legal mechanisms, producing real and irreversible consequences for real people inside the palace. The blocked funds are not the story, they are the proof of concept. The demonstration that when William decides something must change, it changes. Completely. Without warning and without appeal. For Camilla, the implications stretch far beyond the specific discretionary channels that the audit flagged. Every informal arrangement, every quietly maintained network, Every commercial adjacency that her family has built around the warmth of royal proximity now sits under a scrutiny it was never designed to withstand. The financial architecture that sustained those arrangements has been locked. The man who locked it has his father's blessing. And the woman who will one day stand beside William as Queen Consort, Catherine, Princess of Wales, has been present, informed, and aligned with every decision her husband has made throughout this entire episode. That last point matters more than almost anything else in this story, because Catherine is not a passive figure in what is unfolding. She is a strategic partner whose own relationship with the British public, forged through years of dignified service and deepened immeasurably by her transparent and courageous navigation of her cancer diagnosis and recovery, gives William a moral authority that no audit finding alone could ever provide. Together, they represent something the British public has been quietly waiting for, a monarchy that earns its position rather than simply occupying it. And here is the truth that sits at the very heart of everything this audit, this confrontation, this swift and surgical exercise of royal authority has revealed. Queen Elizabeth II spent the final years of her life building legal and financial structures designed to ensure that the monarchy passed intact, protected, and uncompromised to the grandson she trusted above all others. She anticipated the challenges, she prepared for them, she outmaneuvered them from beyond the grave. William is not dismantling Camilla's influence because he is ruthless. He is dismantling it because his grandmother asked him to protect something sacred, and he intends to keep that promise, whatever it costs, whatever it takes, however long it requires.